what cellular carriers are best for RVing and cruising.
We'll talk to you about the
Ish.
4 carriers that are nationwide in the United States.
Hi there, I'm Cherie.
And I'm Chris.
And we run the Mobile Internet Resource Center, which we have been doing since 2014, and we track the options for RVers and cruisers to keep connected in their travels. And cellular is a top way still that many RVers and cruisers keep online. And of course, the question comes up all the time, well, which cellular carrier should I go with if I want to travel across the country?
And it seems like, from advertising and all the marketing you see, that there's a lot of carriers out there, a lot of choices to choose from. But behind the scenes, there are actually only, 4 nationwide cellular networks owned by 3 companies. And anything else that you see that is providing nationwide coverage is sitting kind of somehow on top of those networks. So it's important to understand what they are and what the differences between them are.
So, spoiler alert, there is not right now a single best carrier. It really comes down to what works best in the current location that you are at. And well, as a nomad, someone who might be moving locations from time to time, maybe even quite frequently, your location is going to be changing, which means the carrier that works best for you is also going to be changing. So at this point in time, the 3 major carriers are kind of all have their pros and cons that make them each something to consider. And we think that most people who rely on mobile internet and cellular should choose at least 2 of them.
Yeah, have some redundancy on board makes all the difference in the
3.
world. Maybe even 3 on board. And it comes down to who's got the better plans, what works best with the devices you have, and then, of course, where you're going to go.
So first up, Verizon, the big red carrier. And for many years, Verizon has been the default choice that RVers and cruisers have chosen. If you go into any RVing forum and people ask what is the best carrier, Verizon comes up most frequently. And that's because they led the way with LTE in the 2010s. And they had the biggest and largest LTE footprint across the entire nation, which is, of course, a prime feature that travelers want to have because you want to have coverage most likely where the places you want to go. However, Verizon has done a fantastic job of getting a lot of customers, which means that congestion is frequently a problem with Verizon. So you get to an area with a lot of people, especially seasonal places where RVers and boaters might want to flock, let's say like in the winter going south. You get a lot of congestion, which means you get a lot slower speeds in crowded areas, which means Verizon's great for coverage, but not always best for speeds and getting usable service in a lot of the places you might want to go. But they still are a great option, especially for that coverage, and especially if you're going to non-crowded areas.
Now, looking ahead towards the future of Verizon's network, they are been focusing their 5G rollouts on ultra-wideband millimeter wave 5G. This is the super short range, super fast 5G that is primarily in core urban areas, just like the hearts of cities, stadiums, a few shopping malls, a couple tourist destinations, but not the wide open, beautiful places that RVers and cruisers tend to be. Verizon does have a 5G nationwide network that they have rolled out over a set of bands that is basically overlaid on old 4G bands, and that is at best really good 4G. It's not really showing next generation performance yet. When things get interesting with Verizon and 5G as you go into the future, they have a bunch of mid-band, C-band spectrum that they have purchased that is going to be coming online late 2021 and into 2022 and beyond. But very few devices, current 5G devices, are going to be compatible with this. It's band N77, and look for that because that's going to be the heart of Verizon's true next generation 5G capabilities going forward. So seeking out compatibility with that going forward, very important on Verizon.
But for now, Verizon's still going to be great on LTE for many years to come.
Absolutely.
AT&T, the blue carrier, has been a long-time second runner-up to Verizon as far as coverage. And while their coverage map, especially for LTE, is slightly behind Verizon in many places, what they have done in the last couple of years is they won a contract to deploy FirstNet, which is the first responders network on band 14. But that contract gave them the funding to climb every tower in the country and upgrade their equipment and upgrade the amount of spectrum they had to offer to all their customers across the country. And what we have seen is that in places where there is solid AT&T signal, they have lots of capacity, which means really great speeds in the places where they have coverage, which makes them a great option to consider as part of your mobile internet arsenal.
Now, the real catch with AT&T, though, is they have kind of a hodgepodge patchwork quilt of spectrum all across the country, and more so than any other carrier, they benefit from having an advanced modem, whether an LTE Advanced Pro, a higher-end LTE device, or a 5G device that can stitch those different bands together to get more speed. Particularly on AT&T, seeking out compatibility with LTE Band 14, that FirstNet band, is very, very important. It gives you kind of access to a back road expressway that a lot of older devices in particular aren't going to be able to use. And then, as you go into 5G, you need stuff that supports all across the bands that AT&T is doing. Now, going forward, AT&T has been doing some millimeter wave rollouts. They've been doing 5G on a nationwide overlaid on their 4G. So far, their 5G is really nothing to write home about in most places. Heading further into 2022 and beyond, they will be doing mid-band 5G rollouts, and pay attention to the new devices, the new bands that AT&T is taking advantage of to stay compatible, because again, they're going to remain this patchwork quilt network, and keeping your hardware up to date to take advantage of it is the secret to really taking advantage of AT&T's network.
And T-Mobile. For many years, they were a solid third-place carrier, well behind the big two. But they have made major strides in the last couple of years to increase their network coverage across the country on LTE, and more importantly, are leading the race to nationwide long-range 4G or 5G coverage. And they have come up, and really in the last couple of years, to be a carrier you definitely should be considering to have part of your arsenal, because in the places where there is T-Mobile signal, and their coverage map is still behind the other two, but in the places there is signal, they have some of the fastest speeds if you have good signal with them. And they are also leading that charge to 5G, which makes them a carrier that is worthwhile looking at for 5G equipment.
Yeah, particularly if you are investing in 5G now, T-Mobile is the place to focus. They are trying to do what Verizon did in the 4G era of be the first, kind of like, lay the groundwork to have the first big worthwhile 5G network. Then they're doing this kind of in two ways. They're focusing on their 600 megahertz spectrum that they've used to enhance their LTE coverage in LTE band 71, but they're really focusing on band N71. That's the 5G version of that band. So that T-Mobile is rolling out good 5G in rural areas. They're focusing on a lot of small towns, rural areas, because that's a long-range band. It's not super, super fast, but it's really, really solid. It's giving them a great foundation to build their 5G on top of. And then because T-Mobile bought Sprint and now has all this Sprint spectrum, a lot of that spectrum is mid-band spectrum, band N41, and this is the heart of T-Mobile's kind of like next generation 5G performance, and people are getting 500, 700 megabits per second on N41, and that's not super long range, but it's not super, super short range like the millimeter wave that Verizon has been focusing on, and it gives you a real next generation 5G experience. But again, now with T-Mobile, pay attention to the hardware that you're getting. You've got to have support for band 71 or N71, band 41, and then all the legacy T-Mobile bands as well.
And of course, T-Mobile did purchase Sprint mostly to get that spectrum. And by mid-2022, Sprint will be fully integrated into T-Mobile's network. Right now, they're still separate and operating and still in transition. So we're considering Sprint kind of a 3.5 carrier. Yes. You can still get Sprint Direct plans, but they will become T-Mobile plans in the months ahead. So it's time to start looking at T-Mobile being the third carrier, with Sprint fully phasing away. And there is supposed to be a fourth carrier coming in to take Sprint's place as part of the merger agreements. and that's Dish Network.
Yeah, Dish Network's Project Genesis. The federal government really wanted to maintain the status of having 4 nationwide carriers to preserve competition. So as part of allowing Sprint and T-Mobile to merge, T-Mobile had to pass off a lot of nationwide spectrum to Dish Network to enable Dish to become a new 4th carrier. And Dish is making some progress towards that, some moves towards that. They have a Project Genesis that is going to be launching without any legacy 4G technology. It's a completely native 5G network coming maybe late 2021, probably more realistically into 2022, but it is just getting started. It's going to take a very long time for Dish to take advantage of the spectrum and to actually roll out nationwide.
And of course, there are other carriers out there. They're more regional, not nationwide coverage. Of course, the biggest one out there is US Cellular. They have coverage in certain areas of the country, and if you're in those areas, they might be a carrier that you want to consider as part of your setup. But if you're traveling outside of those areas, then they might not be something you want to rely on.
Yeah, they have roaming agreements, so their maps look like you can go anywhere, but most of the country, you're outside of their native coverage. You're not using their towers, and if you spend too much time out of their native maps, they will have to cancel your service because they're paying the other carriers to let you roam.
And there are other smaller regional carriers across the country, and if you live in those areas or in those areas frequently, they might be a consideration for you in those locations. And then there are a whole bunch of other companies that present themselves as a carrier where they really are just buying in bulk coverage and spectrum from the 3 major carriers and reselling it to you. Some with very official agreements like MVNOs, Mobile Virtual Network Operators. You might know those as Straight Talk, Consumer Cellular, and others like that. Those ones actually show up on your phone as that carrier name. And then there are third-party resellers. A lot of companies out there that are somehow acquiring lines of service and reselling them to you under their name. So you have to kind of do a little bit of legwork to figure out which of the carriers are behind the scenes to make sure you're getting the coverage map and features that you want.
Yeah, and there's a certain special type of MVNO that actually can take advantage of multiple carriers behind the scenes. This has kind of been pioneered by Google Fi. So Google Fi says Google Fi up there, and they have agreements behind the scenes to use Sprint, T-Mobile, and US Cellular spectrum. But for the most part, most MVNOs, they will just be using a single carrier behind the scenes, and it's very important to know what network you're actually relying upon.
So when it comes to selecting which carrier you want in your setup, we think any of those 3 are going to be suitable for most nomads' setup. And in fact, you might want to consider 2 or maybe all 3 to get the most personal coverage map to cover you in your travels. Now, there's more than just selecting your carrier. There's, of course, the data plan and the equipment and your signal enhancing strategy. And that's what we focus on, is the helping you find your right setup for your specific travels. So head on over to the Resource Center. We have a whole bunch of content. We have a whole collection of guides just focused on cellular, on working remotely, on entertainment, and homeschooling the kids on the road. So come on over. Join us. All of this content, we have a lot of free content, but we have a whole bunch more available to our premium members, our MIAs who make this all possible, because we don't do sponsorships, we're not selling you stuff, and we try to remain as unbiased as possible, presenting you information so you can make informed decisions.
Now, the important thing to remember is that this is all possible. You might have to feel like you're assembling a jigsaw puzzle of devices, plans, carriers, connectivity, but it comes together and you can get connected in amazingly beautiful places like this to be able to work effectively, stay in touch with friends and family, and make a wonderful life on the road.
So until next time, may the bandwidth be with you. These videos are brought to you by our premium members, our mobile internet aficionados. They make it possible for us to track this news and create these videos. If you like this video, please give it a thumbs up, leave a comment, subscribe to our channel, or better yet, consider becoming a member yourself.